Hello everyone. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting. It would really help the channel out quite a bit. Thank you very much.
We present Crawford Logan as Paul Temple and Gerda Stevenson as Steve in Paul Temple and Steve, a serial in 8 episodes by Francis Durbridge. Episode 2, 27A, Berkeley House Place. Paul Temple, the celebrated novelist and private detective, is visited by an old friend of his, Sir Graham Forbes of Scotland Yard, and by a Mr. Philip Kaufman, who is temporarily attached to the special branch. Kaufman tells Paul Temple about a notorious criminal known as Dr. Belasco.
See, Dr. Belasco doesn't create crime, Mrs. Temple. He organizes crime. Organizes the existing crime, as it were. There's a subtle difference.
Take the protection racket. There's nothing new about the protection racket. It's as old as the hills.
Good old Chicago.
Exactly. But Belasco is organizing it in this country. Belasco is putting the whole thing on a new, solid, business-like footing. Let me give you an example. There's a grocer's shop in Soho, quite a flourishing little grocer's. It's owned by a woman called Mrs. Broadman. Mrs. Broadman used to pay Bruno French 17 shillings a week protection money, but she doesn't pay it any longer. Instead, she pays 25 shillings a week to an organization controlled by Dr. Belasco.
Talk to the authorities in Copenhagen about Dr. Belasco, Mr. Temple. Talk to them in Oslo, in Stockholm, in Prague. Ask to see the Belasco dossier. There are precisely 279 closely typed pages dealing with the activities of the notorious Dr. Belasco.
Belasco works alone, I take it?
Nearly always. But there is sometimes another man with him, a man called Ross Morgan.
Is Morgan over here?
Morgan arrives tomorrow afternoon, Mrs. Temple, and I have suggested to Sir Graham that you and your husband go down to Harwich tomorrow morning and wait for the boat. The moment it docks, be on the lookout for Morgan. Watch him like an eagle watching a hawk.
The following afternoon, however, there is a railway accident, and Ross Morgan is killed. Temple searches the body and discovers a cigarette lighter. The lighter appears to be identically the same as one which Steve possesses, but which they have reason to believe belongs to Philip Kaufman. Later the same night, when Temple and Steve return to their flat, they discover that a casual acquaintance of theirs, a man by the name of David Nelson, has called.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Mrs. T.
Any messages, Charlie?
No, sir. But there's a gentleman here, sir. He called about 5 minutes ago. Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes, ma'am.
What on earth does he want, I wonder?
Where is he, Charlie?
In the lounge, sir.
Right.
Ah, so here you are.
Hello, Mr. Nelson. What can I do for you?
Well, I'm sorry to trouble you, Mr. Temple, especially at this time of night, but... Well, I think your wife has got my cigarette lighter.
Your cigarette lighter?
Yes. I offered Mrs. Temple a cigarette last night at the Villa Rica, and I believe I put my lighter down on the table. One of the waiters said that he thought he saw Mrs. Temple put it into her handbag.
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, I believe she did. My wife's terribly absent-minded these days, I'm afraid. If you'll just wait... Oh, here you are, Steve.
Hello, Mr. Nelson.
Good evening, Mrs. Temple.
Darling, have you got that cigarette lighter? The one we thought belonged to Mr. Kaufman.
Why, yes. Here it is.
Is this your lighter, Mr. Nelson?
Yes, that's the one, all right. You must have picked it up off the table, Mrs. Temple, without thinking.
Yes, of course I did. I remember now. How stupid of me. Then it's your lighter, Mr. Nelson?
Yes, I'm rather afraid it is.
It's got rather a curious design on it. We find it rather intriguing.
You mean the acorn? Yes. Yes, I've often wondered if it had any particular significance.
Where did you buy the lighter, Mr. Nelson?
As it happens, I didn't buy it. It belonged to my wife.
Have you any idea where she got it from?
No, I'm afraid I haven't.
Could you find out?
I doubt it very much. You see, my wife committed suicide just over 2 months ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But why are you so curious about the lighter? I know it's a rather unusual one, but
It's not
surely...
quite so unusual as you'd imagine.
No.
No. Take a look at this.
Why, it's just the same. It's got the same design on it. Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Where did you get that lighter?
I got it from a man called Ross Morgan.
Ross Morgan?
Yes. Does the name convey anything to you, Mr. Nelson?
No. No, I'm afraid it doesn't.
Morgan was a Canadian. We travelled down to town together this afternoon from Harwich, but there was a railway accident and Morgan was killed. I searched the body and discovered this cigarette lighter. Ross Morgan was a friend, one might almost say an associate, of a certain Dr. Belasco.
Dr. Belasco?
You've heard of Dr. Belasco, I take it?
Yes, I have heard of Dr. Belasco. That's odd. I've only heard that name mentioned once before in my life, but I've never forgotten it. I heard it one evening just after dinner about 3 months ago. I was going upstairs to my bedroom when I heard my wife on the telephone. She was in the library. She sounded worried and terribly unhappy. I don't know who she was talking to, but as I passed the library door, I distinctly heard her mention the name Belasco. Dr. Belasco. When I saw her at breakfast the next morning, I asked her about it, and she said that I must have been mistaken, and that she knew of no one called Dr. Belasco.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes, Mrs. Temple.
I wonder if you'll forgive me if I ask a rather personal question.
Mm-hmm.
Why did your wife commit suicide?
I don't know why she committed suicide, Mrs. Temple. I've tried to find out. I've done my damnedest to find out. I've even employed a private investigator, but it was no use. Renee, my wife, was always a temperamental, moody sort of a person, but somehow I think she must have had a very sound reason for doing what she did.
Do you think she was being blackmailed?
I don't know. I suggested that possibility to Mary Hamilton, but she...
To Mary Hamilton?
Yes.
Was Mary Hamilton the private detective you mentioned? The person you engaged to find out why your wife committed suicide?
Yes.
What did she find out exactly?
Look here, do you know Mary Hamilton?
What did she find out, Mr. Nelson?
She found out what I already knew, or at any rate suspected.
What was that?
She found out that Renee had been mixing with, well, rather a peculiar crowd of people.
What sort of people?
Oh, well, there was a woman called Mrs. Forrester, a widow.
Mrs. Guy Forrester?
Yes.
Go on, Nelson.
She used to give a lot of parties. I suppose she still does, for that matter. Renee was quite a friend of Mrs. Forrester's. She frequently used to go and stay with her for weekends.
Was Mary Hamilton under the impression that Mrs. Forrester had had something to do with your wife's suicide?
Yes. I suppose she must have been. She certainly asked me quite a lot of questions about Mrs. Forrester the last time we met.
What sort of questions?
She wanted to know whether I was a friend of hers.
Are you?
Good Lord, no.
Do you think it's possible that Mrs. Forrester gave your wife the cigarette lighter?
Yes. Yes, quite possible. I know she very often did give Renee presents. I hadn't thought of that.
When did you last see Mary Hamilton?
Just over a week ago.
Did she tell you whether she was making any progress or not?
No. Beyond asking the questions about Mrs. Forrester, she was rather non-committal. As a matter of fact, I've got an appointment to see her tomorrow afternoon.
I shall be surprised if she keeps it, Mr. Nelson.
What do you mean?
She's dead.
Dead? What do you mean, dead?
She was murdered.
Murdered? I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. You're joking. You're just trying to... Oh, what happened?
Early this evening, my wife and I went to a cafe in Soho. We had reason to believe that the proprietor of the cafe, a man called Henry Worth, had information concerning a certain person that we were particularly interested in. Rather to our surprise, we discovered that a private inquiry agent, Mary Hamilton in fact, was working at the cafe as a waitress.
As a waitress?
Yes.
But why on earth should she be doing that? Mr. Temple, who was that certain person that you were particularly interested in? Dr. Belasco?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Look here. Don't you think it's possible that Mary Hamilton discovered that the mysterious Dr. Belasco was responsible for my wife's death, and she was trying to find out, probably from Henry Worth himself, the real identity of Belasco?
Yes, it's possible.
And supposing...
Yes? Supposing what?
Supposing Mary Hamilton discovered that Dr. Belasco was a woman. Supposing, in fact, she discovered that Dr. Belasco was none other than Mrs. Forrester.
Well?
Well, wouldn't that explain why she was murdered?
Or you could say the same thing about Henry Worth.
Or yourself, for that matter, Mr. Nelson.
Yes. Yes, I suppose you could. Mr. Temple.
Yes?
Who is Dr. Belasco?
I don't know. Yet.
What does that mean?
It means we're going to find out, Mr. Nelson.
It's no good arguing the point, Kaufman. You've seen the doctor's report, you've seen the report from Professor Harvingale, and you've heard what Mr. Temple has had to say about it. The position, therefore, to my way of thinking, is really
But,
this.
Sir Graham, if the girl was murdered in the cafe and then deliberately taken...
What do you mean, if? Of course she was murdered in the cafe.
I disagree.
What do you mean?
Mr. Kaufman means that it's quite possible that Mary Hamilton was murdered after she left the cafe, in which case my car was probably the most convenient place to dump the body.
But what about the medical report?
The medical report states that the girl had been dead the best part of 40 minutes. I know. Therefore, if you attach supreme importance to the medical report, quite obviously you are right, Sir Graham, and the girl was murdered in the cafe. Personally, however, I don't think so.
You don't?
No.
Well, I suppose, strictly speaking, this is your pigeon, Inspector Perry. Have you seen Mr. Worth?
Yes, I saw him this morning.
What did he say?
Precisely what you'd expect him to say. That the girl left the cafe shortly after she served you. Apparently a staff ticket in Tunster, taking an early evening off.
Did he know that her name was Mary Hamilton and that she was a private inquiry agent?
He says not.
How long had she been working there?
Just over a week.
What's your opinion of Mr. Worth, Inspector?
My personal opinion.
Yes.
I like him.
So, you like him?
Yes. And shall I tell you why I like him, Mr. Kaufman? Because he's got guts. He came to this country just over 12 months ago. He hadn't a bean to his name, and he hadn't a friend in the world. Within 10 weeks, he'd ploughed his way through a massive red tape, bought a business, and was doing very nicely for himself.
Is he straight?
Well, that's rather a leading question. He sails pretty near to the wind, but then, if it comes to that, quite a lot of people do, especially in Soho. Yes, he's straight, Mr. Kaufman.
I suppose you know that Ross Morgan, the Canadian, had instructions to contact Worth the moment he arrived.
Yes, I heard Mr. Temple say so.
He told Temple that he'd never heard of Ross Morgan or Dr. Belasco.
How do you account for that, Inspector?
I don't account for it. You asked me my personal opinion of Mr. Worth, and I gave it to you. I think he's straight. Yes, Sergeant?
I beg your pardon, sir, but this letter's just arrived. It's marked urgent and strictly confidential.
For me, Sergeant?
No, sir, it's for Sir Graham.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Excuse me a minute.
Anything wrong, Sir Graham?
No. Inspector, tell me, do you know a man called Marks?
Marks? Harry Marks, sir?
Yes. Well, at least he signs himself H. Marks. It'll be the same man, I expect.
Oh, I know Harry Marks all right. I expect you do too, Mr. Temple.
Yes, I know Harry Marks.
Well, what do you know about him?
Before the war, he ran a small antique shop on the Edgware Road. The shop was a blind. He was really a fence. When the war started, I lost track of him. I believe he went out to South Africa or somewhere.
All right. Yes, well, he's not in South Africa at the moment, Mr. Temple. He's back over here. He's been over here for some little time.
Well, what's he doing?
He's running a protection racket. According to all accounts, he's got quite a nice little clique around him.
Well, I'll read you the letter. Dear Sir, I learned from a reliable source that Scotland Yard are interested in the identity of a certain Dr. Belasco. If you will meet me this evening at Worth's Cafe in Soho, I shall be pleased to place certain information concerning this gentleman at your disposal. Be at the cafe shortly after 10.
You say this man Marx runs a protection racket?
Yes.
Then it's perfectly obvious what has happened. Belasco intends to take him over. Marx has got wind of this and is obviously out to double-cross him.
Yes.
This might be our chance, Sir Graham, so far as Belasco is concerned.
You will no doubt observe, Inspector, that our friend Mr. Worth once again comes into the picture.
In rather an interesting manner, Mr. Kaufman, don't you think?
What do you mean?
Well, if Harry Marks thought that Mr. Worth was Dr. Belasco, he would hardly suggest his cafe as a suitable place for a rendezvous with Sir Graham.
Yes. Yes, that's true. That's quite a point, in fact. Quite a point.
Our friend Mr. Worth seems to have quite a flourishing little business.
Yes, I think he does quite nicely.
The place is certainly crowded tonight.
There's a table over there, Sir Graham, in the corner.
Oh, yes. Let's go over.
Oh, so sorry, sir.
That's quite all right.
You've dropped your paper.
Oh, thank you.
You sit there, Temple. You can see the door better.
Yes, all right.
Who's that girl over there?
I don't know. I was just looking at her.
She'll certainly know me again. Cigarette?
Oh, thanks.
Do you see any sign of Marx?
No. He's not here at the moment.
You recognize him all right, I suppose?
Oh, yes, don't worry about that. I'd know Harry Marks anywhere. Ah, here's Worth.
Where?
He's just coming over.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Worth.
Is there anything I can get you, sir?
Well, we're waiting for a friend of ours, so would you mind if we didn't give you our order until he arrives?
But of course not. Let me get you an ashtray, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Temple.
Yes.
I feel I owe you an apology, sir. Last night, when you were here with Mrs. Temple, I must have sounded both extremely rude and very sure of myself.
Oh, that's all right.
I hope you'll accept my apologies, sir.
There's nothing to apologize about.
It's not easy running a cafe like this, you know, Mr. Temple. There are so many restrictions, so much red tape. The police, well, sometimes they are never off my doorstep. I try to do the best I can, Mr. Temple.
I'm sure you do.
If you want to know anything about me, about my character, I mean, ask Inspector Perry. He knows me. He knows me personally. He knows I always try to play the game.
You told me last night that you'd never heard of a man called Dr. Belasco. Was that the truth?
Yes.
You know who this gentleman is, don't you?
Yes. I recognized you immediately, sir, from your photographs.
Did you? You ought to be on my staff, Mr. Worth.
We have an appointment with a man called Harry Marks. He asked us to meet him here at 10 o'clock.
Harry Marks?
Yes. Do you know him?
Yes. Yes, I know him. I don't like him. He's a notorious character. I don't encourage that sort of person to frequent my cafe.
When was the last time you saw Mr. Marks?
About 4 weeks ago.
Here at the cafe?
Yes. He dropped in one night about 7 o'clock. He stayed for 5 or 10 minutes, that's all.
I see.
Will you excuse me? I have rather a lot of things to attend to just at the moment.
Goodbye, Mr. Worth.
Good night, Mr. Temple.
I'm not so sure that Perry's right about that young man.
Something's happened to him. He's scared. Now, I wonder what exactly has scared him. Hello. Here's that girl we were talking about.
The seat taken, Dux?
Yes, I'm afraid it is.
No, I don't think it is. Allow me.
Oh, thanks very much. You two boys together?
You ought to know.
What do you mean?
You've been watching us for the last 5 minutes.
Well, I like that, I must say. Is your name Forbes?
Yes.
I've got a message for you.
For me?
Yes, from Harry. Harry Marks.
What is the message?
Is he a friend of yours?
Yes, it's all right, Miss...
Chandler. Billy Chandler.
It's all right, Miss Chandler. You can talk.
Harry's waiting for you. He's outside of town.
He told me to meet him here at 10 o'clock.
I know, but he couldn't take any chances.
Where is he? My name is Temple. Paul Temple.
He's in a car on the Great North Road. It's parked about 6 miles this side of Longford.
How long should it take us to reach him?
About an hour. Perhaps less if you step on it.
We'll step on it.
Are we nearly there?
Yes. You'll see the car in a moment.
Is that it?
Yes.
What do you want me to do?
Stop short. About 30 or 40 yards.
Yes, all right.
He's got his lights on. Oh, they're off now.
It's all right. It's only a signal. Pull into the side.
This all right?
Yes, that's all right.
Well, shall we get out?
No. No, wait here. I'll fetch him. I shan't be long.
Why don't we walk across to the car with you? It'll save time.
No. He wants you to wait here.
Why? I'm not at all sure that I like the look of this, Miss Chandler.
It's all right, honest. Honest, it's all right. There's nothing to worry about. Don't you see? Harry's just cautious. He's frightened that...
He's frightened that someone else might have picked you up and forced you to bring them out here.
Yes.
All right. Fetch him.
I'll switch the engine off.
Hello.
He's got his engine running.
Yes.
She's nearly reached the car.
Yes.
Hurry! It's Billy! It's okay! He's here! Ah!
What is it?
She's seen something. I've got a hunch that Mark isn't in... My God!
Temple!
They were waiting for us.
The car's coming! Get down, Sir Graham!
Are you all right? Sir Graham? Sir Graham?
I twisted my leg getting down. That's better.
You're sure?
Yes, I'm all right.
Then come along.
Poor kid. She hadn't a chance. She hadn't a dog's chance, Temple.
Let's carry her back to the car.
Yes, all right.
Can you manage?
Yes, I'll manage. What do you think happened?
Well, it's obvious what happened. Belasco and his crowd discovered what Marks was up to and trailed him here.
Do you think they've got Marks in the car, then?
No. It's 1,000 to 1 he's dead. And if you want my opinion, he's not far from here.
Yes. I shouldn't be surprised.
Right. Let's put her on the back seat. Open the door.
Aye.
There we are.
Poor kid. She little knew what was in store for her.
I'll have a scout round, Sir Graham, and see you back here at the car.
All right, Temple. Well?
Marks is dead, all right. They dumped him in a ditch about 20 yards from where their car was parked.
Well, that's that.
I found this wallet on him.
They can't have searched him.
No, we probably arrived on the scene a little sooner than they expected.
What's that card you got?
Oh, it was in the wallet. It's an invitation to a party.
What sort of party?
Apparently a cocktail party.
I shouldn't have thought that Harry Marks was the sort of man who went to cocktail parties.
No, he wouldn't have thought so.
What's it say?
It says, you are cordially invited to a cocktail party at 27A Berkeley House Place on Friday, April the 4th at 6:30 p.m.
April the 4th? That's tomorrow.
Yes.
Is it addressed to Harry Marks?
Yes, it's addressed to Marks, all right.
Well, who's it from?
It's from a lady called Mrs. Forrester.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Shall I take your coat, sir?
Thank you. I suppose most of the other guests have been here for hours.
Guests, sir?
Yes.
I think there must be some mistake, sir.
For the cocktail party.
We haven't a cocktail party, sir. Not today, sir.
This is 27A, Mrs. Forrester's?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed, sir.
Well, I had an invitation to a cocktail party, a long time ago. As a matter of fact, I think I've got it here somewhere.
The party was cancelled, sir. Oh, a long time ago. Mrs. Forrester wrote to the guests personally. I'm surprised you didn't receive a letter, sir.
Yes, I'm rather surprised myself. Oh, well, if the party's off... By the way, haven't I seen you before somewhere?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
I was under the impression that I bumped into you last night at a cafe in Soho.
Why, no, sir.
You sure?
Quite sure, sir.
I'm not usually mistaken, but...
What is it, Joseph?
I think it's the gentleman you've been expecting, madam.
Oh, yes, how stupid of me. How do you do, Mr. Temple? I'm Mrs. Forrester. Won't you come into the lounge?
You've been expecting me?
But of course.
You have been listening to the second episode of Paul Temple and Steve, a serial in 8 episodes by Francis Durbridge, with Crawford Logan as Paul Temple and Garda Stevenson as Steve. Others taking part were Candida Benson, Jimmy Chisholm, Emma Curry, Richard Greenwood, Michael Mackenzie, Greg Powery, Gareth Thomas, and Nick Underwood. The production for the BBC was by Patrick Rayner.